My girlfriend said. I'm tired of dating potential while other women are dating success. I calmly nodded, took back my apartment keys, and ended everything without a single argument. A year later, she walked into a luxury car dealership and froze after realizing the quiet man she mocked was buying the vehicle her boyfriend couldn't afford to lease. You know what my problem is? Other women are dating finished men while I'm out here still dating potential. The sentence landed like a door closing. Not because she screamed it. Not because she was even looking at me when she said it. She said it while scrolling through luxury apartment listings on her phone, her legs curled under her on my couch, inside my apartment, using the key I'd given her 3 months ago when I thought we were building something real. I didn't respond immediately. I just sat there for a moment and let the words settle into the room like dust after a small explosion. Then I looked at her. Then I held out my hand. I'm going to need those keys back. She laughed. Actually laughed. The kind of laugh that's really just a wall going up. Seriously? Yeah. She thought the conversation was about money. It wasn't. A year later, she walked into a luxury car dealership in Midtown Manhattan with a man she'd replaced me with. And she froze. Because the quiet man she'd once called potential was standing at the front desk in a charcoal overcoat, calmly signing paperwork on a vehicle her new boyfriend couldn't come close to leasing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. Let me tell you how we got there. Her name was Candace. We met at a rooftop networking event in Chelsea, the kind of party where everyone is either genuinely connected or pretending to be, and the skyline does most of the heavy lifting in terms of impressiveness. I was there with my friend Stanley, who worked in commercial real estate and had somehow accumulated an enormous network of people who wore blazers over t-shirts and called themselves entrepreneurs. Candace was there with her colleague Felicity, both of them in finance-adjacent marketing roles at a firm that managed brand partnerships for mid to high-end lifestyle companies. She was smart, quick with observations, had this way of cutting through small talk that I found genuinely refreshing. We talked for almost 2 hours that first night. Not about success or money or status, just about ideas. About the city. About what we were actually trying to do with our lives versus what we told LinkedIn we were doing. I liked her immediately. I was 28 at the time. She was 26. We'd both been in New York long enough to be a little tired of it and not yet ready to leave. I was working in a mid-level sales development role at a B2B software company in the Flatiron District. Decent salary, good team, reasonable upward trajectory. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that would impress anyone at a rooftop party. But I was also doing something on the side that I didn't talk about much. Not because I was hiding it. Just because I'd learned a long time ago that talking about unfinished things was a good way to jinx them. We dated for almost 2 years. The first year was genuinely good. We went to food markets in Brooklyn. We argued comfortably about movies. She cooked badly and laughed about it. I cooked adequately, and she was impressed by the wrong things, like my ability to make a bechamel without lumps. She stayed over more and more. Eventually, I gave her a key. Eventually, somewhere around month 14, something began to shift. I didn't notice it at first. Looking back, I should have paid attention right there, at the exact moment the shift began. But I was busy, and I was comfortable. And sometimes comfort is just another word for not looking too closely at what's changing around you. It started small. The first real sign came at dinner with her colleagues. A group of maybe 8 people, all working in various corners of finance and marketing and consulting. One of the guys, Rodney, had just gotten a promotion. Regional director at some asset management firm. He was talking about it in that practiced, humble brag way people do when they want you to know exactly how well they're doing while maintaining the appearance of modest surprise. Candace was watching him with this particular kind of attention I hadn't seen her use before. Not attraction, exactly. Something more like hunger. On the walk home, she said, "Rodney has that energy, you know? Like he knows exactly where he's going." I said, "He also mentioned his salary 3 times. She laughed, but the comment lingered in the air a little longer than it should have. That comment stayed in my head longer than I admitted to myself at the time. A few weeks later, we were at a party at her friend Marissa's place, a high-floor apartment in the East Village that Marissa shared with 2 other women, but somehow always looked like it was staged for a real estate listing. There was a man there named Edgar, a friend of a friend, who had recently launched some kind of fintech startup and had apparently closed a seed round. He wasn't obnoxious about it. He was actually pretty low-key. But Candace spent a lot of the evening near him. Not suspiciously, just gravitationally. Later, she told me that Edgar had, that founder energy. She used that phrase a lot in the months that followed, that energy, as if ambition was something you could feel radiating off a person, something visible and measurable and either present or absent. I asked her once, lightly, what she meant by it. She said, "It's hard to explain. It's like you can just tell when a man is going somewhere." I let it pass. I should have pressed it. By month 16, the comparisons had become more direct, not cruel, not constant, but present in a way that had a pattern to it. Felicity's boyfriend, Maurice, had just bought a new car, an Audi, nothing outrageous, but new and visible in the way new things are, and Candace mentioned it while we were watching TV one night. "Maurice just got the Audi," she said. "I know. You mentioned." Felicity seems really happy. I looked up from my laptop. "About the car?" "About where things are going. Like, forward motion." You know, I went back to my screen. But that word stayed with me. Forward. Implying, without saying it directly, that something between us was stationary. The social media thing started around that time too. Candace had always been moderately active online, posting for work, occasional lifestyle content, the usual background hum of modern professional life in New York. But she started following a different kind of account. The luxury apartment tours. The soft life aesthetic reels. The finance bro success content. She started watching a lot of videos of women who had what the captions called the life they deserved. I noticed. I didn't say anything. At the time, I told myself everyone goes through phases. Told myself social media had a way of warping people's reference points temporarily, and she'd recalibrate. Looking back, that was the moment I should have started asking harder questions. Not about her. About us. Month 18 brought what I privately called the rooftop dinner. Stanley had organized a group dinner at a rooftop restaurant in the meatpacking district, the kind of place where you pay $40 for a cocktail and the view does most of the work. There were about 12 of us, a mix of people from Stanley's world, some of Candace's colleagues, a few people I knew from work. Seated 2 chairs down from Candace was a man named Derek, not in our original group, but a friend of someone's +1. He worked in private equity. He had one of those jawlines that seems specifically designed for wealth management. He wore a watch that I recognized but didn't know the name of, which I'm fairly sure was the point. Derek was charming in an easy, uncomplicated way, the kind of charm that comes from never having needed to try too hard. Candace talked to him for most of the dinner. I talked to Stanley, which was always genuinely enjoyable, and tried not to catalog the number of times I heard her laugh at something Derek said. But on the cab ride home, something happened. She was quiet for a while. That particular quiet that means something is forming. And then she said, "Derek just closed a deal that'll make him a partner before 30. Good for Derek. He was saying that in this city, if you're not building equity in your 20s, you're just falling behind. He sounds like a LinkedIn post." She didn't laugh. "That was new." She said, "I don't think it's wrong, though." I turned to look at her. She was staring out the window at the city sliding past, and I remember thinking she looked very far away for someone sitting 2 feet from me. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. I want to be accurate here. I want to be fair to the version of Candace that existed before the status anxiety took hold, because that person was real and she mattered to me. She wasn't calculating. She wasn't cold by nature. She was a woman who had grown up watching her parents work hard for a middle-class stability that always seemed slightly fragile, who had moved to New York and found herself surrounded by visible wealth and social aspiration on every corner, and who had, gradually, quietly, without perhaps even fully realizing it, started measuring love in terms of security and security in terms of the things you could see. The apartment, the car, the restaurant, the watch, the trajectory. I understood it. I just couldn't fix it. Because the thing she couldn't see, the thing she had no reason to look for, was already quietly in motion. But more on that later. Month 19 was the month of small cruelties. Not dramatic, not explosive, just a series of small, precise wounds. We were at a birthday gathering for Felicity, a large, loose dinner at an Italian place in the West Village. The table was noisy and overlapping in the way good dinner parties are. At some point, Candace was telling the group about a work trip she had coming up, a conference in Miami, something glamorous sounding. Someone asked who she was going with. She mentioned her colleague's name and then added, almost as an aside, "And I'm going to try to get a room upgrade. Lord knows I don't get the luxury treatment at home." She laughed. The table laughed. I didn't say anything, but I felt it. Not the comment about the hotel. The at-home part. The easy way she'd made me the punchline without flinching. Later, at the door, when we were getting our coats, Felicity touched my arm and said quietly, "She didn't mean it," which told me that someone else had noticed, which told me it was visible, which told me the issue was no longer just between us. There was another night, about 3 weeks later. We were at her company's informal end-of-quarter gathering, a bar near her office, low-key, open to partners and plus ones. A senior executive at her company was there. Older guy, mid-40s, name I didn't catch. He was talking about a property he'd just bought in the Hamptons, and the crowd around him had the specific density of people performing casual interest while intensely calculating relevance. Candace pulled me toward the group. I'm naturally an observer. I listen more than I perform. I ask questions instead of broadcasting answers. At some point, the executive asked me what I did. I told him, software sales, Flatiron, B2B. He nodded with the polite absence of real interest. Candace jumped in, and I expected her to say something small and supportive. Instead, she said, "He's figuring it out. You know how it is. Some people just take longer to find their lane." She said it lightly, warmly, even, the way you'd say it about someone you were making excuses for. The executive smiled and moved on. I stood there for a moment with that sentence hanging in the air. Some people just take longer to find their lane. Said about me. To a stranger. At a party I'd attended as her support. I excused myself, went to the bar, and stood there for a while looking at the bottles. Stanley called me that night, after I got home alone. Candace had stayed to network, and I told him what she'd said. There was a pause. Then Stanley said, "That's not what people say about someone they respect." He was right. I already knew it. I was just still deciding what to do with knowing it. The final conversation happened on a Thursday. Not a dramatic night. No candles, no rain. Just a regular Thursday in my apartment, which she'd been spending most of her time in lately, and which she treated with a comfortable proprietary ease that no longer felt earned. She was on her phone when I got home from work, those luxury apartment videos again. She'd been watching them more than ever. Big windows, marble counters, views you paid for in years of your life. I made coffee. I sat down across from her. I didn't say anything at first. She looked up eventually and said, "Felicity and Maurice are looking at places in Hoboken. They found something with a rooftop deck. That's good for them." She put the phone face down. "Don't you ever want more than this?" I looked at her. "What does that mean?" "This." She gestured at the apartment, a perfectly decent one-bedroom in the East Village, my apartment, that I paid for without difficulty. "This isn't where I pictured being at 28. Where did you picture being?" "Somewhere that felt like progress." There it was again. Forward. Progress. Lane. The vocabulary of a woman who had decided she was ahead of where she was. I set down my coffee. She sat up straighter, and something came into her face. The expression of a person who has been rehearsing a speech and has decided the time has come. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said. "About what I want. About where things are going. Okay. I need someone who's already made it. Or at least someone who knows how to get there fast. I love you, but love isn't the whole thing. I'm tired of dating potential while other women are dating success." And there it was. Clear. Contained. Almost rehearsed. I didn't feel the explosion of anger I maybe should have felt. I felt something quieter. I felt the last version of something I'd been trying to preserve quietly close. I nodded once, and then I held out my hand. "I'm going to need those keys back." She blinked. "What?" "The apartment keys. The ones I gave you." She stared at me. "You're serious right now?" "Yeah." She waited for me to argue, to explain, to get emotional and give her something to push against. I didn't. She reached into her bag slowly and found the keys. She set them in my hand. She hesitated before letting go. That hesitation, the slight pause before her fingers released the metal, told me everything. It told me she'd expected me to fight, to convince her to stay, to promise to be more, earn more, become more, fast enough to satisfy a timeline I hadn't been consulted on. I closed my hand around the keys. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said. And I meant it. She thought the conversation was about money. It wasn't. It was about the fact that I'd built something she hadn't thought to look for, and I'd been building it quietly for 2 years while she'd been measuring me against the visible surface of other men's lives. But I didn't say that. I just let her go. The weeks after the breakup were strange in that particular way that endings are when you're the one who made the final move. There was grief. Real grief. Not the kind that comes from heartbreak exactly, but the kind that comes from releasing the version of the future you've been quietly planning. I missed certain things. Her voice on weekend mornings. The way she organized her shoes by color when she stayed over. The dinner we'd been talking about trying in the Bronx and never actually went to. I didn't call her. She called once, about 2 weeks after. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. Stanley took me for a long walk in Riverside Park the first weekend, and we talked about nothing important for 2 hours, which was exactly right. He knew what I'd been building on the side, had known for months. He'd asked about it once and I'd explained, and he'd responded with a simple, "Okay, that makes sense. Carry on." That was Stanley's version of a standing ovation. I should explain what I'd been building, not because I need to justify the ending, but because understanding it reframes everything that came before. About 2.5 years before Candace said what she said about potential, I had quietly begun a side project. It started, as these things often do, from a frustration at work. I was in software sales, and I kept seeing a gap, a structural inefficiency in how mid-sized companies manage their vendor procurement cycles. Not glamorous, not the kind of thing that makes for interesting party conversation, but it was a real problem with a real market, and I knew the landscape because I was inside it every day. I spent nights and early mornings building a simple tool to address it, then a less simple tool. Then I started testing it with 2 companies I'd met through Stanley's network. Then I brought in a contractor, then 2. By the time Candace gave the keys back, we had 12 paying clients. By the time she was 3 months into her new relationship, we had 31. By month 7 post-breakup, I had quietly left the Flatiron job. Not because I had to, because the math had changed enough that the risk in staying started to outweigh the risk in going. I didn't announce it. I didn't post about it. I didn't change my LinkedIn headline to something that started with founder in capital letters. I just got to work. Through mutual friends, I heard things, the way you always do in New York when social circles overlap like subway lines. I heard that Candace had started seeing someone new. His name, I was told by Felicity, who ran into me outside a coffee shop in the village and seemed genuinely torn between loyalty and narrative impulse, was Connor. Connor was in consulting, looked good in photos, drove a leased BMW, took Candace to the kind of restaurants that have small plates with large prices. Felicity said it with a particular careful neutrality that told me she was evaluating my reaction. I said, I hope she's happy. And the thing is, I actually meant it. Not in the way people say things they don't mean. In the actual way. Because I was no longer measuring myself against what I'd lost. I was measuring myself against where I was going. And where I was going was accelerating. There was one moment, maybe 8 months after the breakup, when Candace tried to reach out more directly. A text. Short, friendly in tone, calibrated to sound casual. Hey, heard you left your job. Hope everything's okay. I read it twice. Heard you left your job. Which meant the word had gotten out through the mutual network, stripped of context, interpreted as either brave or reckless depending on your relationship with risk. She'd interpreted it, based on the hope everything's okay, as reckless. I smiled at the phone. I put it back down and went back to the investor update I was writing. I didn't respond. Not out of coldness. Out of the simple, clean recognition that some conversations have already had their ending, and reopening them just smudges it. The dealership was on 57th Street. I won't pretend the whole thing wasn't cinematic. It was. But it was cinematic the way real life occasionally is, not staged for an audience, just quietly, precisely, inevitably aligned. I'd taken a meeting nearby that morning, an investor discussion that had gone well enough to leave me in a good mood, and a particular kind of clarity that comes when the work you've been doing quietly starts to confirm itself. I had an appointment at the dealership that I'd scheduled 3 weeks earlier. The car was a matte black G-Wagon. Not new money. Not flash for the sake of flash. Just something I'd looked at on a quiet Sunday 6 months earlier, run the numbers on, and decided I'd buy when the numbers said yes. They said yes. I walked in at 11:15. The showroom was everything showrooms like that are: polished concrete, soft lighting, the careful silence of a space designed to make objects feel like they already belong to you. A sales associate named James had worked with me previously on the test drive and the paperwork. He saw me come in and walked over with a folder. Everything's processed. Just need the final signatures. Perfect. We sat at the desk near the front windows. The sun was coming in at a low angle. The G-Wagon was parked to my left, matte black, catching the light in that particular way dark paint does, absorbing rather than reflecting. I was reviewing the documents when I heard the door open. I didn't look up immediately. Then I heard the voice. They have the GLE here, right? He wanted to see the GLE. Candace. I heard it before I saw her. The voice was the same, slightly higher when she was trying to sound authoritative about something she wasn't certain of. She'd used that register when talking to waiters she wasn't sure of, or service people she was trying to impress with her consumer knowledge. I looked up. She was standing near the entrance with a man I assumed was Connor. Talish, good-looking in that uncomplicated way, wearing a coat that was trying hard to be in the right category. He was on his phone. She was scanning the showroom the way people do when they're assessing whether a space confirms their sense of themselves. Then her eyes moved, doing that automatic circuit of the room, and landed on me. I watched it happen. The processing sequence. The well-dressed man at the front desk. The sales associate beside him with documents. The matte black vehicle behind them. Then, recognition. Her expression moved through 4 things in about 2 seconds. Surprise. Confusion. Assessment. And then something that landed in her eyes and didn't leave. A quiet, particular comprehension that I'd spent 2 years watching her apply to other men and had never once seen her direct at me. Until now. I nodded once. Not warmly. Not coldly. Just the acknowledgement you give someone you once knew well and have since returned to the category of stranger. She took a half step forward, then stopped. Connor was still on his phone. James said something to me about the insurance paperwork, and I turned back to the desk. Here is what happened next, in the order it happened. Connor got off his phone. He and Candace approached a different sales associate near the Qley display. There was a conversation. Some back and forth. Candace had her professional voice on, the one she used when she wanted to establish that she was a serious person who understood what she was looking for. Connor didn't have that voice. He had the other one, the one that people use when they're slightly out of their depth and compensating with confidence. I wasn't watching directly. I was signing documents. But the showroom was quiet and not that large. I heard, at some point, the words financing terms, and then monthly payment, and then a pause in the conversation that had a texture to it. The kind of pause that means someone has just heard a number they weren't prepared for. Then, let me make a call. Connor stepped away. Candace stood near the Qley alone for a moment. I was handing James the last document. He shook my hand and said, "Congratulations. You want us to walk you through the tech setup?" Sure. We walked toward the car. To get there, I passed approximately 6 feet from where Candace was standing. I looked at her directly. She looked at me. Neither of us smiled exactly. She said quietly, "Hi." "Hey, Candace. You look..." She stopped. Started again. "You look well." "Thanks. You too." James was waiting. There was a pause that lasted maybe 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds I watched her try to find some version of this moment that made sense inside the framework she'd built. The framework where I was potential, where I was figuring it out, where I was someone who needed longer to find his lane. She was trying to reconcile that framework with the man standing in front of her in a charcoal overcoat, signing purchase documents on a vehicle Connor couldn't get approved for a lease on. The framework didn't hold. I could see it not holding. I excused myself gently and walked toward the car. She found me again near the entrance 20 minutes later when I was about to leave. Connor was still on a phone call outside. Financing call, maybe. Or maybe he was talking to someone else entirely. I didn't know and didn't need to. Candace came up to me with that particular walk, the careful, composed walk of someone who has decided to say something and is trying to carry it like it doesn't weigh anything. "Can I just say something?" I waited. I didn't. She paused. Resettled. I didn't know. Know what? About any of this. A small gesture. The room. The car. "I didn't know you were building something." She absorbed that. "I didn't know how serious it was," she said. "You never talked about it." "No," I agreed. "I didn't." She looked at me with something I hadn't seen in her expression before. Something that had the structure of regret, but also of recalibration. The look of a person who has been using the wrong map and has just realized the distance they've gone in the wrong direction. "I think I made a mistake," she said. I looked at her for a moment. Not unkindly, just honestly. "I think you made the choice that made sense to you at the time," I said. "Based on what you could see." She nodded slowly. "And now?" she asked. "Now I think we see things more clearly." Connor was visible through the glass doors, still on his phone, hands in his pockets with the particular stillness of a call that isn't going well. Candace followed my gaze briefly. "I should," she started. "Yeah," I agreed. She looked at me one more time. Something moved across her face that I couldn't fully name. Something between goodbye and too late, and I understand now, and I'm sorry all at once. "Take care of yourself," I said. She nodded. She walked away. James brought the G-Wagon around front while I waited on the sidewalk. The day was cold and clear, the kind of winter afternoon in New York where the light is low and sharp and everything has good edges. I thought about the version of me that Candace had dated. The man who came home to that one bedroom and worked quietly on nights and weekends on something he didn't talk about, who sat at dinners and absorbed small cuts without deflecting them, who handed back his own apartment keys because he'd understood, in that moment, that the relationship had already ended, that what was left was just the procedural conclusion of something that had been ending for months. She'd called that man potential. She'd meant it as an insult, as a limitation, as a reason to look elsewhere for something more fully formed. But she'd had it backwards. Potential isn't the absence of success. Potential is success before it's visible. And the only difference between the man she'd dismissed and the man she'd just watched sign paperwork on a $200,000 vehicle was time and discipline, and the refusal to measure himself through someone else's impatience. I drove uptown. The city moved around me, the crosswalks, the yellow cabs, the scaffolding and steam and noise of a place that is always in some stage of becoming something. I thought about what Felicity had said to me the night of the birthday dinner. She didn't mean it. And I thought, maybe not. Maybe there was never a version of Candace that sat down and deliberately designed a strategy of small humiliations. Maybe it had all been the accumulated pressure of a city that turns everyone into an auditor of other people's worth. Maybe. But it had happened anyway. And the ending of it had been the beginning of something for me. Not revenge, not a mission to prove anything to anyone. Just the clean, quiet acceleration that comes when you stop managing someone else's relationship with your potential and just let the work speak. The work had spoken. Stanley called me that evening. I told him what had happened. The full sequence. The showroom, the financing call that didn't work out, the brief conversation at the door. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did it feel like you expected?" I thought about it. "Quieter," I said. "That's usually how the real ones feel." I agreed. He asked if I was going to reach back out to her. No, not even as. No. He laughed a little. Okay. We talked about something else for a while, a deal he was working on, a restaurant we'd been meaning to try in Astoria, the particular indignity of New York winters. After we hung up, I sat in the apartment for a while. The new apartment. Not the one-bedroom in the East Village. A different place. Larger. Higher up. With the kind of view Candace had been scrolling through on luxury apartment pages while sitting on my couch. I thought about that, about the specific irony of it, and then I let the thought pass. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because meaning lives forward, not backward. And I had a lot of forward left. Here is what I've understood on the other side of it. The man Candace left was real. His limitations were real. He was building something that no one could see yet. And in the absence of visibility, the only thing a certain kind of person can find to measure is what's present on the surface. The apartment, the job title, the car, the forward motion of the externally observable kind. She wanted proof before she was willing to believe. Some people are like that. They can't invest in a blueprint. They need the building. I don't blame her for it. I stopped blaming her somewhere around month 3 post-breakup, when I was too busy to maintain the energy required for blame. But I also don't carry any illusion about what the dealership meant. It didn't mean I was right and she was wrong, exactly. It meant she'd made a calculation based on incomplete information, and the calculation had cost her something she didn't fully value until it was gone. That's all. It's quiet, the justice of that. It doesn't require commentary. It doesn't require an argument or a confrontation or a speech. It just requires time and the patience to let your work become visible on its own terms, at its own pace, without needing to announce it to the person who doubted it. A few weeks later, I was having coffee with a woman I'd recently started seeing. Her name was Yvonne. She worked in architecture, design, and planning large urban projects. She had the quality that I'd always been most attracted to, genuine curiosity without performance. She asked questions because she wanted to know the answers, not because asking was impressive. On our second date, she'd asked what I was building. I told her. The whole thing. The origin, the gap I'd identified, the quiet years of nights and early mornings, the current state of the company. She'd listened without performing interest. Then she said, "How long before you knew it was going to work?" "About a year in," I said. "But I couldn't prove it to anyone yet." "Did you need to?" I looked at her. "No," I said. "I just needed to keep going." She nodded like that was the obvious answer. Maybe it was. Maybe the most important thing isn't finding someone who believes in the finished version. Maybe it's finding someone who doesn't need the building to be complete before they can see the blueprint. I drove through the city on a Friday evening in late February, the skyline coming into view in pieces through the windshield the way it does from the bridge. There was a dinner, Something easy, something good, nothing that needed to prove anything to anyone. Somewhere across town, Candace was wherever she was. I hoped, in the genuine way, that she was okay. I hoped she'd found what she was looking for, or was closer to it. I hoped she'd learned, as I had, that the person you're measuring against the wrong standard is sometimes the one you're going to wish you'd read more carefully. But mostly I just drove. The city opened up ahead of me. The lights were coming on, and I had somewhere to be. She finally wanted the man she once rushed to replace. By then, I'd already handed the keys to someone else.